with us. There's another piece of this puzzle, another component in the crime of the century that involved catapulting a relatively unknown radical millionaire to the stratosphere of evilldom so Bush could become a wartime president. And for that piece of the puzzle, we have to go a little farther back, even before 2001, even before Bush was made president by the Supreme Court in 2000. We have to go back to 1999 when Bush was still governor of Texas. Take a look at this 2006 sworn testimony at a congressional hearing from Cindy Sheehan, a woman who lost her son in the Iraq War.
The leadership of this country rushed us into an illegal invasion of another sovereign country on prefabricated and cherry-picked intelligence. Iraq was no threat to the United States of America, and the devastating sanctions and bombing raids against Iraq were working. As a matter of fact, in interviews in 1999 with respected journalists and longtime Bush family friend Mickey Herskowitz, then Governor George Bush stated, "One of the keys to being seen as a great leader is to be seen as commander-in-chief. My father had all this political capital built up when he drove the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and he wasted it. If I have a chance to invade, if I had that much capital, I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to get everything passed that I want to get passed, and I'm going to have a successful presidency," end quote. It looks like George Bush was ready to lead this country into an avoidable war even before he became president. From the expose of the Downing Street memo and the conversations with George Bush from 1999, it seems like the invasion of Iraq and the deaths of so many innocent people were preordained. It appears that my boy Casey was given a death sentence even before he joined the Army in May of 2000.
So is she right? Was the Iraq War all planned out back in 1999? And did Osama bin Laden do just exactly what President George W. Bush so badly needed when he attacked us on 9/11? For more on this, I'm joined by Russ Baker, editor of WhoWhatWhy.com and author of the book Family of Secrets, The Bush Dynasty. Russ, welcome.
Thank you, Tom.
First of all, first question, Cindy Sheehan's quote. I believe that you were the guy who talked to Mickey Herskowitz and had that information. Was that accurate, her testimony before Congress?
Yes, in fact, they asked me to come to Washington when they were having some informal hearings to talk about my reporting. I document this in great detail in my book, Family of Secrets. Basically, in 2004, when I was working on the book, I was able to meet with Mickey Herskowitz, a well-known and well-respected Texas journalist who had been George W. Bush's writing partner on a book project when Bush was running for president. Mickey had never before spoken to a member of the press of what transpired back then. He did speak with me, and in essence what he told me was that when they were writing partners and they were trying to put together what Bush was going to do as president, Bush really didn't have any ideas at all what he hoped to do as president. He was really stumped, and Mickey kept pushing him to provide something that they could use in the book. And finally, in an unguarded moment, Bush turned to him and said, "I'll tell you one thing I'm going to do." He said, "If I get a chance, I'm going to invade Iraq." And Mickey told me that he was stunned by this, and he said to Bush, "Why do you want to do that? What's your thinking?" And you might have thought he would say something about the story that Saddam wanted to take out his father, but instead he simply said, "Look, I've realized that you cannot have a successful presidency unless you have a war. When I was an advisor to my father, when my father was vice president and president, we were hearing all the time that this was absolutely critical. We looked at people like Margaret Thatcher with the Falklands Islands, and we looked at Reagan with Grenada, and my father with Panama, and we saw, boy, do those poll ratings go up, and we need to do that too."
That's absolutely incredible. So arguably what bin Laden did on 9/11 was the very best thing that could have happened to Bush. His credibility was down. People were questioning the legitimacy of his presidency. They were still counting the ballots, actually, in Florida. The newspaper consortium was. His poll ratings were in the toilet. It seems to have helped him tremendously. I'm curious, $2 trillion later, doesn't this now prove that, or at least indicate that what bin Laden did was the crime of the century rather than an act of war, and that Bush misreacted to it in order to get us into a war?
Well, you know, I think the whole, as you pointed out in the preamble, that the whole question of who Osama bin Laden is and what al-Qaeda is and so forth is enormously more complicated. I think the press of this country has done a terrible job, or perhaps I should say a non-existent job, of investigating what any of this means. And I think a perfect indication of that is that this story that I tell in Family of Secrets, all of it documented with footnotes, with direct quotes from Mickey Herskowitz, all tape recorded and so forth. The American mainstream media has refused to cover this story at all.
The story that George Bush was planning on having a war so that he could have political capital, so that he could privatize Social Security and the other things that were on his list that he had run for Congress back in the 70s on.
That's right, and I mean, you know, this, of course, in itself, I think would constitute a crime. In other words, creating a war under false pretenses. And then this explains perfectly, we see from Donald Rumsfeld's new memoirs, where he says, he claims, I'm not sure we can trust him, but he says he couldn't figure out why Bush kept pushing him to look at Iraq when they wanted to look at Afghanistan. So Bush clearly had this on his mind, and it's so, you know, staggeringly cynical. And again, I mean, for the failure of the American media to tell this story to the American people, the real reason that we're in those places, it's a huge issue.
It is. It truly is. Russ Baker, thanks for the great investigative reporting you've been doing and for being on the program with us tonight.
Thank you, Tom.
In the last 10 years of